The light in the debrief chamber was the color of old bone, and the woman sitting across from Dr. Marin Calloway had not blinked in 4 minutes. "Start from the quarry," Commander Eshana Voss said. She set a recorder on the table between them, its amber indicator already pulsing. "The moment you realized what was underneath." Marin looked at her own hands. Dust still lined the creases of her knuckles, red-brown dust from the Alcazar Basin, from the deepest core sample she had ever pulled. 41 hours ago those hands had been holding a piece of stone that should not have existed on any planet in the known galaxy. Now she was sitting in a hardened room beneath the city of Meridian, 3 kilometers below the surface megastructures, answering questions she did not yet have language for. "The quarry wasn't the beginning," Marin said. "The signal was." Voss waited. 6 days ago, Geophysics Station 14 flagged an anomaly in the deep mantle scan grid. Sector Alcazar, northern edge of the basin where the old lithic beds meet the engineered substrate. The scan registered a harmonic, a standing wave resonating through about 400 meters of compressed metamorphic rock. The signature wasn't geological. It was too regular, too clean. The waveform repeated on a 61-second interval. I'd never seen anything like it. "And you reported it." I filed a notation with the Basin Survey Office. "Standard procedure, but the scan was mine and I wasn't going to hand it off." Marin paused. "I drove out to Alcazar the next morning with a 2-person drill rig and my field technician, Rowe." Voss made a small note on her tablet. "What time?" "Oh, 4:30 local. The basin is an hour east of the Meridian perimeter wall by ground transport. We cleared the gate at the eastern checkpoint, crossed the irrigated belt, and hit open desert by sunrise. The Alcazar Basin is, you've seen it from the air, I assume. It's a depression roughly 80 kilometers across, pre-engineered terrain mostly. Humanity reshaped the northern continental shelf during the consolidation, 50,000 years after the departure, but the basin floor predates us. Its original crust, or close to it. Some of the oldest unmodified rock on Earth." "I'm aware of the geology," Voss said. "Get to the harmonic." We set up the rig at the coordinates the scan had flagged, drilled to 90 meters without incident. Standard layering, alluvial silt, compacted sandstone, a band of engineered basalt from the consolidation-era reinforcement grid, then original metamorphic rock below that. The harmonic was stronger at 90 meters. I could feel it through the drill housing. A pulse, like a slow heartbeat in the stone. Marin stopped. She could feel it again now, even here, even underground in this featureless room. That rhythm, not mechanical, not quite organic, something older than either. We pulled the first deep core at 112 meters. That's when it changed. Changed how? The core sample was wrong. The mineral composition was nothing I'd cataloged in 20 years of field work. Crystalline structure I'd never seen, a lattice that refracted light in directions that didn't correspond to the crystal's geometry. Rowe thought the drill bit had contaminated the sample. I ran a field spectrograph. The readout came back with 6 elemental signatures that aren't on Earth's periodic table. Voss leaned forward slightly. Not on Earth's table, but on someone else's. I didn't know that yet. Not at that moment. All I knew was that I was holding a piece of rock that had no business being 112 meters below the Alcazar Basin, embedded in strata that predated human civilization by a geological age. I marked the site, sealed the core, and called it in to the survey office. Priority flag. They patched me through to the Alcazar sector watch within the hour. That's when my office was notified, Voss confirmed. Yes, your people arrived by midday. A full containment team, engineers, 2 mineralogists from the Meridian Institute, a security detail. They expanded the drill site, set up a perimeter. By evening, we had a secondary shaft running parallel to mine and a third on the far side of the anomaly. All 3 confirmed the same thing. The foreign mineral bed extended laterally for at least 200 meters in every direction. It wasn't a vein or a pocket. It was a structure. Marin let that word settle. A buried structure. At 112 meters depth, under 50,000 years of sediment, in rock that hadn't been touched since the aliens left. Voss said nothing for several seconds, then, walk me through the next 12 hours. The mineralogists confirmed my spectrograph readings. 6 non-terrestrial elements. 3 of them matched known entries in the Departure Era archive, materials catalogued from the Selevari occupation sites before they left Earth. The other 3 were unknown even in those records. We weren't looking at leftover mining waste or a collapsed structure. The crystalline lattice was intact. The harmonic I'd detected from the surface was the structure itself, resonating. It was still active. Active how? Vibrating. Emitting a low-frequency standing wave that propagated through the surrounding rock. Not decaying, not diminishing. A steady, continuous oscillation that had apparently been running for 50,000 years without interruption. The power source was embedded somewhere deeper in the structure. We couldn't reach it with the drill rigs we had. And the clock started. Marin nodded. That's when your people told me about the fleet. Voss set down her tablet and folded her hands. Dr. Calloway, for the record, at 1500 hours on the day of your discovery, long-range detection arrays in the outer system registered a transit signature consistent with a Selevari crusade fleet. 47 vessels. They had entered the solar system from the direction of the Vethran Passage, a route the Selevari used during the departure, 50,000 years ago. The fleet was decelerating toward Earth on a trajectory that would bring them into high orbit within 72 hours. 72 hours, Marin repeated, and you think the structure I found is connected? The harmonic signature your drill site is emitting matches within 3 decimal places, the navigational beacon format used by Selevari temple fleets during their original occupation of Earth. You didn't find a ruin, Dr. Calloway. You found a homing signal. The room was very quiet. The structure has been broadcasting for 50,000 years, Voss continued. The Selevari buried it before they left. A seed, a call-home marker, placed deep enough that no surface activity would disturb it, designed to pulse until someone came back to retrieve it. And now someone is coming back. Marin's mouth was dry. 72 hours. 61, as of this conversation. The fleet has not responded to hails. The Meridian Defense Authority has raised the city's shield envelope to standby. The Northern Continental Battery is cycling to readiness. The orbital platforms above us have repositioned to cover the Alcazar Basin approach corridor. All of this is happening because of what you found. I'm a geologist, Marin said. I drill rocks. You're the only person on this planet who has physically touched a piece of that structure and can describe its composition under oath. That's why you're in this room. Marin sat with that for a moment. Through the reinforced walls she could feel nothing, no vibration, no hum of the vast city above. Meridian was the largest human settlement on the northern continent, a megastructure complex that stretched 40 kilometers along the redesigned coastline and rose in tiers to a height that cast shadows visible from orbit. She had lived in its lower geology quarter for 11 years, walking corridors carved from engineered bedrock, riding lifts through strata that told the story of 50,000 years of human patience. And beneath all of it, beneath the deepest foundation pier, a piece of alien engineering had been quietly singing for longer than any human structure had existed. What do you need from me? Marin asked. We need you back at the site. The survey office has authorized an emergency excavation to reach the core of the structure before the fleet arrives. We need to know what it is, how it works, and whether we can disable it. Disable a beacon that's been running for 50,000 years. Or understand it well enough to decide whether disabling it is the right choice. You have the field expertise. The mineralogists can analyze samples in the lab, but they don't know how to read a drill site in real time. You do. Marin looked at the recorder on the table. Its amber light pulsed steadily, and for one disorienting moment the rhythm matched the harmonic she had felt through the drill housing in the Alcazar basin. 61 seconds between pulses, the same interval. As if the planet itself were counting down. "When do we leave?" she said. They lifted out of meridian at 0300, 5 hours after the debrief ended. The transport was military, a low-altitude shuttle with armored plating, and an escort of 2 atmospheric interceptors that peeled off to patrol altitude once they cleared the city perimeter. Marin sat in the cargo bay with a case of survey instruments on her lap, watching the city fall away through the narrow viewport. Meridian at night was a thing that stopped language. The tiers rose like the shelves of a continent turned vertical, each level lit from within by the amber glow of a civilization that had spent 50 millennia building with the patience of geology itself. The upper tiers caught starlight, the mid-levels pulsed with transit networks and residential grids, the lower foundations merged seamlessly with the engineered bedrock, so that the city appeared to grow from the earth rather than rest upon it. Above it all, at the edge of visibility, the running lights of 2 orbital defense platforms traced slow arcs across the sky, each one a structure larger than any warship ever built, hanging in permanent station over the northern continent. She had seen Meridian from the air 1,000 times. Tonight it looked different. Tonight she understood what it was, not a city but an answer. 50,000 years of answer, built stone by stone, stratum by stratum, by a species that had been left behind and had chosen not to forget. The Selevari had occupied Earth for 9 centuries before the departure. They had arrived as a religious crusade, a temple fleet following a doctrinal mandate to consecrate worlds they considered spiritually dormant. Earth, in their theology, was a fallow field awaiting the plow. Humanity had been an inconvenience, a local fauna too stubborn to relocate, too primitive to resist. The Selevari had built their temple complexes across the planet's surface, mined its minerals, reshaped its watersheds to suit their liturgical calendars, and treated the native population with the distracted benevolence of gardeners tolerating weeds. Then they had left. The doctrinal cycle turned, the crusade moved on to the next fallow world, and Earth was released from consecration with as little ceremony as a landlord vacating a lease. The Selevari had taken their temple complexes, their orbital infrastructure, their liturgical machinery. They had left behind 9 centuries of environmental damage, a bewildered human population, and, as Marin now knew, at least one beacon buried deep enough to outlast the geological record. 50,000 years. In that time, humanity had done what humanity does when it is left alone with a grudge and a long memory. It had rebuilt, not in the image of the Selevari, not in imitation of their technology, but from the ground up, literally. The consolidation had taken the first 8,000 years, terraforming the damaged watersheds, engineering new continental shelves, laying the foundations of the megacity complexes. The next 20,000 had been the ascension, orbital platforms, atmospheric defense networks, deep space detection arrays, warships that patrolled the system's edge with the quiet authority of a border guard who has never had to draw a weapon but keeps it cleaned and loaded. And in the millennia since, humanity had continued building not out of rage, not out of fear, but out of the sheer compulsive momentum of a species that had learned the cost of being unprepared, and had decided, with the patience of continents, that it would never pay that cost again. Earth had not forgotten the Selevari. It had not forgiven them, but it had not spent 50 millennia nursing rage. It had spent them building, and the thing it had built was so far beyond what the Selevari had left behind that comparison was not insult but category error. The transport set down at the Alcazar site at 0450. Dawn was still an hour away, but the excavation perimeter was lit like a stadium portable flood, arrays throwing hard white light across the basin floor, casting the drill rigs and equipment shelters into sharp relief against the surrounding darkness. Marin counted 18 drilling stations, triple the number from 2 days ago. A prefabricated lab module had been erected on the eastern edge of the site, and beyond it a ring of defense emplacements, automated battery positions with their barrels angled skyward, tracking something she couldn't see. Rowe was waiting at the edge of the perimeter, looking like he hadn't slept. "They hit something at 140 meters on shaft 7, he said without greeting. "Crystalline mass, same composition as your original core, but bigger, a lot bigger." "How big?" "They're still mapping it. The ground-penetrating radar suggests the main body of the structure extends from 140 meters to approximately 210 meters depth, roughly 70 meters of solid alien construction, buried under the original crust." Marin whistled low. "That's not a beacon, that's a cathedral. The harmonic is stronger too. You can hear it now standing on the surface. Listen." She stopped walking and stood still. For a moment there was nothing but the hum of generators and the distant whine of a drill motor. Then she felt it, not heard, felt through the soles of her boots, through the bones of her feet. A pulse. Low, slow, steady. The stone beneath her vibrating on a frequency just below human hearing, like the planet itself drawing breath. 61 seconds between pulses, Rowe said. "Like clockwork, like it's been waiting." Marin looked up. The sky above the basin was clear, crowded with stars and the faint tracery of the orbital defense grid. A web of light so fine it looked like a second constellation, a human constellation mapped not by mythology but by targeting coordinates. Somewhere beyond that grid, 47 selevari vessels were decelerating toward this exact spot on the planet's surface. "How long do we have?" she asked. 56 hours, last update." "Then let's go underground." The main shaft had been widened to accommodate a personnel cage, a steel frame lowered on cables through the bore, slow and rattling. Marin descended with Rowe and 2 engineers from the Meridian Institute, their headlamps cutting pale columns through dust that hung motionless in the shaft. The walls changed as they dropped. Engineered basalt for the first 70 meters, dense and uniform, the work of human hands. Then a transitional zone where the engineered layer merged with original crust. Then raw metamorphic rock, dark and old, shot through with mineral veins that glittered under the lights. At 112 meters, the depth of her original core sample, Marin saw the first trace of alien material. A seam of crystalline substance running through the surrounding rock like a vein of quartz, but refracting her headlamp into colors that had no name in the visible spectrum. She reached out and touched it. The surface was warm. Not residual heat from drilling, not geothermal. A purposeful warmth, the hum of something still running. They descended further. The crystalline seams thickened, converged, became walls. By 130 meters, the shaft was no longer cutting through rock. It was cutting through the structure itself, a tunnel bored through solid alien construction, and the construction was alive with light. The crystalline lattice glowed from within, a deep amber that shifted toward blue at the edges, pulsing in time with the harmonic. The 61-second rhythm was no longer felt through stone. It was visible. The walls breathed with it. The engineers widened a lateral passage at 140 meters, Rowe said, his voice hushed. They broke through into a chamber. The cage stopped. Marin stepped out onto a temporary platform bolted to the crystalline wall and followed Rowe through a rough-cut passage, stooping under support beams. The passage opened and she stopped. The chamber was the size of a concert hall. Its walls curved upward in a smooth parabola, meeting at a point perhaps 30 meters above. Every surface was the same crystalline material, amber and blue, pulsing, alive. The harmonic was not just audible here. It was spatial, directional, a sound that moved through the chamber like a living thing, bouncing from wall to wall in patterns that suggested architecture designed around acoustics no human ear was built for. In the center of the chamber, rising from the floor like a stalagmite carved by a divine hand, stood a column of crystal perhaps 5 meters in diameter and 15 meters tall. It was darker than the walls, a deep indigo that shifted toward black at its core, and the light within it moved differently, not pulsing, flowing, currents of luminescence that spiraled upward through the crystal in slow helices, as if the column contained a captured piece of time and was releasing it one thread at a time. "That's the source," Marin said. She didn't need the spectrograph to know. She could feel it in her teeth, in her sternum, in the architecture of her bones. The column was the heart of the beacon. It had been singing for 50,000 years, and it was still singing now, and the song was not for her. She spent the next 14 hours in the chamber. The first 3 were pure documentation. The mineralogists from the surface lab sent instruments down on the cage, spectral analyzers, resonance mappers, a portable seismograph. Marin set them up around the base of the column and took readings while Rowe documented the chamber's geometry with a laser measuring unit, calling out dimensions that he entered into his field tablet with hands that were not entirely steady. At the 4th hour, Marin found the first subsidiary tunnel. It opened from the east wall of the main chamber, a passage roughly 2 meters in diameter, perfectly circular, its walls the same glowing crystal as the chamber but darker, older somehow, as though this section of the structure had been built first and the main chamber grown around it. Marin shone her headlamp down the tunnel and saw it curve gently to the left, descending. The harmonic was different here, not the steady 61-second pulse of the main chamber but a higher overtone, a thread woven into the larger rhythm. "Rowe, bring a tether." They explored the tunnel for 40 meters before it opened into a second chamber, smaller than the first, perhaps 15 meters across, with a low domed ceiling that made the amber light feel close and intimate. This chamber held no central column. Instead, its floor was inscribed. Marin knelt and brushed dust from the surface and found angular characters cut into the crystal with a precision that suggested tools sharper than anything in her field kit. The characters were unfamiliar, not any script in the Departure-era archive she had studied, but their arrangement was deliberate, rows and columns, a grid, a table of some kind, etched into the living stone of an alien beacon 50,000 years ago. "Can you read it?" Rowe asked. "No, but I can tell you what it is." She traced a line of characters with her fingertip. The crystal was warm under her touch, and the overtone harmonic seemed to respond, a faint brightening in the glow where her finger passed. "It's a manifest, or a log." The Selevari didn't just bury a beacon here, they buried a record. The next 2 hours revealed 4 more subsidiary tunnels, each opening into its own chamber, each chamber inscribed with the same angular script. The engineers had mapped the full lateral extent of the structure using ground-penetrating radar from the surface. 7 chambers connected by passages that radiated from the central column like the roots of a tree. The entire formation covered an area roughly 400 meters in diameter and 70 meters in depth. A buried complex, intact, undisturbed for 50 millennia. At the 8th hour, one of the Meridian Institute engineers, a woman named Dahl who specialized in structural harmonics, made a discovery that changed the texture of everything. "The crystal isn't just broadcasting outward," Dahl said. She was standing at the edge of the main chamber, holding a resonance mapper at arm's length, watching the readout with the focused attention of someone who has just noticed a number that should not exist. "It's receiving." Marin stopped what she was doing. Receiving what? A return signal, very faint, very high frequency, embedded in the harmonic like a carrier wave. The column is sending its 61-second pulse outward, and something is sending a confirmation back. The beacon isn't just singing into the void. Something out there is answering. "The fleet," Rowe said. Dahl shook her head. "The return signal has been present since we started monitoring, before the fleet entered the system, before Dr. Calloway's first drill. This response has been running as long as the beacon itself, 50,000 years. The Selevari didn't just plant a call-home marker. They planted one end of a conversation." The implications settled into the chamber like sediment. 50,000 years of call and response, the beacon singing and something answering, a dialogue maintained across interstellar distances for longer than human civilization had existed. The Selevari had never lost contact with this beacon. They had always known it was here, always known it was active, always known exactly where to come when the doctrinal cycle turned. The readings told a deeper story than Marin had first understood. The crystalline material was a composite, 6 non-terrestrial elements arranged in a lattice that was simultaneously structural and functional. The lattice itself was the broadcast mechanism. Every atom in the structure was part of the antenna. The harmonic was not generated by a machine embedded in the crystal. The crystal was the machine. The Selevari had built a beacon from materials that did not exist on Earth, buried it beneath the original crust, and designed it to outlast geological time. It was, in the most literal sense, a piece of patience made solid. They seeded this world, Marin said to Rowe during a brief surface break, sitting on an equipment crate under the floodlights. Before they left, they planted a beacon that would call them back when the doctrinal cycle turned. 50,000 years, that was their schedule. They always planned to return. And Earth just happened to build a civilization on top of it. Not just happened. Earth didn't know the beacon was here. The mantle scan grid has only been at this resolution for about 30 years. But the consolidation engineers built the continental reinforcement grid right over the Alcazar Basin. They laid engineered basalt to a depth of 70 meters, directly above the structure. They didn't know it was there, but they buried it deeper, covered it with another layer, like putting a second lock on a door you didn't know was a door. Rowe looked up at the sky. The defense platforms were visible now in the pre-dawn light, 2 bright points moving slowly against the gray. 49 hours, he said. Marin went back underground. At hour 44, she found the deepest chamber. It was at the bottom of the structure, 208 meters below the surface, accessible only through a narrow passage that descended at a steep angle from the 4th subsidiary node. The chamber was small, barely large enough for 2 people, and its walls were not inscribed. They were smooth, featureless, dark. The crystal here was nearly black, and the harmonic was different again. Not the 61-second pulse of the main chamber, not the overtones of the tunnels, but a single sustained note, unbroken, as if this small room at the bottom of everything was the voice's source, and the rest of the structure was merely its echo. In the center of the chamber, embedded in the floor, was a disk of crystal roughly 1 meter in diameter. It was perfectly flat, perfectly smooth, and it was warmer than anything else in the structure. Marin knelt beside it and placed her hand on its surface and felt something she could not explain. Not just vibration, not just heat, a density of intention, as if every second of 50,000 years had been compressed into this single object and was waiting to be read. This is the power source, she told Rowe over the comm. Whatever is driving the harmonic, it's here, in this room, in this disk. Can you characterize it? Not with anything I brought. The spectrograph won't even register. Whatever this is, it's operating on principles we don't have instruments for. She paused. It's not losing energy, Rowe. 50,000 years and it hasn't degraded. Not entropy, not heat death, nothing. Whatever the Selevari built, it's perfect. It will run until something breaks it. She stayed in the deepest chamber for 2 hours, documenting every surface, every angle, every temperature gradient. When she climbed back to the main chamber, her hands were trembling not from cold, not from exertion, but from the sustained proximity to something so far beyond her training that her body had registered the gap before her mind caught up. At hour 32 of the countdown, the first Selevari transmission reached Earth. Marin heard about it from Commander Voss, who appeared at the excavation site in person, arriving by military transport with a security detail that doubled the perimeter guard. Voss found Marin in the chamber, standing at the base of the column with a resonance mapper pressed against the crystal, and waited until Marin noticed her. "They're talking," Voss said. Marin set down the instrument. What are they saying? The transmission is in old selevari liturgical format, a consecration preamble. Our translators are working on the full text, but the structure is familiar from the Departure Era archives. It's a formal declaration of return. They're announcing their intention to reconsecrate Earth. Reconsecrate. Their term, the doctrinal cycle, has completed. They're returning to resume stewardship of a world they consider theirs by spiritual mandate. The transmission makes no reference to the current state of Earth. It doesn't acknowledge human civilization. It speaks of Earth as a fallow field awaiting the plow. Marin felt something cold settle behind her ribs. They don't know. They don't know, or they don't care. The transmission is 50,000 years out of date, the language, the format, the assumptions. They're coming back expecting to find what they left: a dormant world, a local fauna too primitive to matter, and a beacon waiting to guide them in. Marin looked at the column. Its indigo light spiraled upward in unhurried helices, beautiful and alien, and utterly indifferent to the civilization that had grown above it. A seed planted by gardeners who had assumed the garden would be empty when they returned. Can we answer them? Marin asked. The Meridian Defense Authority is drafting a response, but the decision on whether to transmit has been referred to the Continental Council. There's a debate about whether to warn them or let them arrive and see for themselves. See for themselves. Voss met her eyes. Dr. Calloway, when that fleet drops below the orbital defense perimeter and gets its first look at what Earth has become, the shock will be its own message. The question is whether we want to spare them that shock or let them earn it. Marin thought about the selevari, 9 centuries of occupation. Watersheds reshaped to fit a liturgical calendar, the planet treated as a fallow field, humanity as weeds. They had left with the serene confidence of owners who would return at their convenience. And now they were returning, and the field they expected to find dormant was a fortress that dwarfed anything their civilization had ever built. Let them see, Marin said. She was surprised by the steadiness of her own voice. Voss nodded. The Council is leaning that way. In the meantime, I need your assessment. Can the beacon be deactivated? Possibly. The column is the primary resonance node. If we disrupt the harmonic, a targeted vibration at a counter frequency, the lattice should stop transmitting. But I don't know what that would do to the crystalline structure. It might fracture. It might cascade through the subsidiary chambers. The entire formation could shatter. Could it damage the surface? At this depth, unlikely, but we'd lose the structure itself. 50,000 years of continuous operation and we'd break it to shut it up. Voss was quiet for a moment. There's another option. Leave it running. Let them home in on it. They'll come to the Alcazar Basin, and when they arrive, what they find above the beacon will answer every question they have. Marin looked around the chamber. The amber and blue light pulsed in the 61-second rhythm, casting their shadows on the curved walls like the shadows of worshippers in a cathedral that had outlived its congregation. The selevari had built this place as a promise. We will return. Earth had built everything above it as an answer. We will be ready. Leave it running, Marin said. The last 20 hours moved with the compressed intensity of a held breath. Marin stayed at the site. She could have returned to Meridian. Voss offered transport twice, but the chamber held her the way certain landscapes hold geologists, with the gravitational pull of deep time made visible. She mapped the subsidiary tunnels, cataloged mineral samples from 7 distinct crystalline variants, and documented the inscriptions carved into the walls of the secondary chambers, prayers or instructions. She couldn't tell which, their angular script cutting precise lines through the glowing crystal. The harmonic accompanied everything, that 61-second pulse, patient and unanswerable. At hour 18, the Continental Council issued a formal alert to all megacity complexes on the northern landmass. Marin heard the notification through the site's communication relay, a terse, measured announcement that a non-human fleet had entered the solar system and was approaching Earth, that defense systems were at readiness, and that civilian populations should maintain normal routines but remain aware of designated shelter locations. The announcement did not mention the beacon. It did not mention the Alcazar Basin. It said nothing about a geologist who had pulled a core sample and cracked open 50,000 years of silence. Marin wondered briefly what the citizens of Meridian were doing right now, whether they were looking up at the orbital platforms they had taken for granted their entire lives and seeing them, perhaps for the first time, as what they actually were. At hour 16, Rowe brought word that the Selevari fleet had passed the orbit of Mars. 47 vessels in a formation that the detection arrays described as ceremonial, a leading wedge of temple ships flanked by escort cruisers, the fleet arranged in a pattern that matched doctrinal texts from the departure-era archives. They were coming in parade order, expecting a processional arrival at a consecrated world. The detection arrays also noted something the Selevari fleet almost certainly had not intended to reveal. The escort cruisers were armed but lightly. Their weapon signatures matched departure-era records exactly. In 50,000 years, the Selevari had not upgraded their military technology. They had not needed to. Every world they had reconsecrated in the interim had been dormant, as their doctrine promised. They had never returned to a world that could fight back. At hour 14, Dahl reported that the return signal embedded in the beacon's harmonic had shifted. The Selevari fleet was close enough now that the conversation between beacon and fleet was no longer conducted across interstellar distances. It was local. The response time had collapsed from what must have been years to seconds. The beacon and the fleet were talking to each other in real time, and the content of that conversation was beyond anything the excavation team could decode. "They know we're here," Dahl said. "The beacon knows we drilled into it. It's been reporting our presence to the fleet since the moment Dr. Calloway pulled that first core." Marin felt the hair rise on her arms. 6 days. The beacon had been telling the Selevari about the excavation for 6 days. They knew about the drill sites, the instruments, the human engineers walking through chambers that had been sealed for 50 millennia. They knew, and they were still coming in parade formation, still expecting a fallow field. Either the beacon's reports did not include information about who had drilled into it, or the Selevari simply could not conceive that the local fauna had the technology to reach it. At hour 12, the Northern Continental Battery completed its readiness cycle. Marin felt it from underground, a subtle change in the background vibration, as if the engineered bedrock of the continent itself had tensed. The battery was a network of energy projectors distributed across 1,200 kilometers of the northern landmass, each one capable of reaching orbit. Together, they constituted a defense system that could sterilize the space above the continent to a distance of 40,000 kilometers. They had been built during the ascension and maintained in continuous readiness for 30,000 years. They had never been fired. At hour 8, Marin climbed to the surface and stood at the edge of the excavation perimeter looking up. The sky was clear. The orbital defense platforms had shifted position overnight, 4 of them now, not 2, arranged in a diamond pattern above the Alcazar Basin. And beyond them, at the very edge of visibility, she could make out the silhouette of something vast against the stars. A ship. A human warship, kilometers long. Its hull catching faint starlight along weapons platforms and shield arrays that ran its entire length like the spine of a creature too large for easy comprehension. It hung in high orbit with the stillness of a predator that has located its quarry and is waiting for the correct moment. 2 more were visible to the east, 3 more to the west if the faint points of light she thought she saw were what she suspected. The human fleet was positioning itself above the basin, above the beacon, above the place where the Selevari expected to arrive and find their garden waiting. The garden had grown teeth. At hour 6, Rowe found her at the edge of the perimeter and handed her a canteen. She drank without tasting. The desert air was dry and cold, carrying the faint mineral scent of the basin floor and something else, a vibration at the edge of perception. The beacon's pulse translated through 100 meters of stone into a tremor in the atmosphere itself. The whole basin hummed. Dahl's latest reading, Rowe said. The beacon's output has increased by 4% in the last 6 hours. It's not a malfunction. The structure is ramping up. It senses the fleet getting closer and it's getting louder. Getting ready, Marin said. For what? She had no answer, but she felt one forming in the geology of her instincts, the same wordless recognition that told her where to drill, where the strata would break, where the fault lines hid. The beacon was not just calling the Selevari home. It was preparing to receive them. After 50,000 years, the machine was completing its purpose. At hour 4, the Selevari fleet crossed the orbit of the moon. Marin was in the chamber when the final hours began. She sat on the floor at the base of the column, her back against the warm crystal, listening to the harmonic resonate through her body. The pulse had not changed in frequency or intensity in the 6 days since her discovery. It would not change. It was designed to be constant, to sing the same note for geological ages, to outlast everything above it and be the last voice in the dark. But it was not the last voice. Above the beacon, above the chamber, above the 112 meters of rock and the 70 meters of engineered basalt, above the desert floor of the Alcazar Basin with its ring of floodlights and defense emplacements, above the atmosphere where interceptors flew patrol patterns, above the orbital platforms in their diamond formation, above the warships hanging silent in the high dark. Above all of it, the Selevari fleet was arriving. She felt the moment they entered detector range of the beacon. The harmonics shifted, not in frequency but in texture. A resonance, a response. The crystal column's indigo light brightened, its spiraling currents accelerating as if the structure recognized the approach of its makers. The beacon had found what it had been singing for. 50,000 years, and the Selevari had finally heard it. The Selevari came in slowly. They had been decelerating for days, shedding velocity with the unhurried confidence of priests approaching a consecrated site. Their formation held the ceremonial wedge, the escort flanking, the whole procession arranged according to a liturgy written before humanity had discovered metallurgy. Marin imagined them on their command decks, looking at their instruments, seeing the beacon's signal growing stronger as they approached, everything confirming what they expected. The seed was still singing, the garden was still dormant, Earth was still theirs. The first scan would have reached them as they crossed the orbital threshold. Marin didn't hear it. She was underground in the chamber, watching the column pulse, but she knew from the reports Voss relayed to the site over the secure channel. The Selevari fleet's initial long-range scan of Earth's surface returned a dataset that did not match any record in their archives. Where they expected a dormant world with scattered indigenous settlements, the scan showed a planetary surface dominated by megastructure complexes. Cities that covered thousands of square kilometers, connected by transit networks visible from orbit, their energy signatures orders of magnitude beyond anything the Selevari fleet was equipped to produce. Where they expected open sky, the scan showed a defense grid, orbital platforms, atmospheric batteries, shield generators, weapons arrays distributed across every major landmass. Where they expected a fallow field, the scan showed a fortress. The Selevari fleet slowed, then it stopped. For 4 hours, the fleet hung at the edge of Earth's orbital defense perimeter, motionless. The beacon continued to pulse. The defense platforms maintained their positions. The human warships did not move. Marin sat in the chamber and listened to the harmonic, counting the 61-second intervals, each one a heartbeat of a world that had spent 50,000 years becoming something its former tenants could not recognize. The second Selevari transmission came at hour 1. Voss related to the site in real time. It was different from the first. The liturgical preamble was gone. The formal language of consecration had been replaced by something rawer, simpler, a query stripped of ceremony. Marin did not speak Old Selevari, but the translator's rendering was plain enough. We departed this world 50,000 years ago. We left a beacon to mark our return. We hear the beacon still, but we do not recognize the world above it. We are requesting acknowledgement. Is this Earth? The Continental Council authorized a response. It was transmitted from the Meridian Defense Authority's primary communications array in Old Selevari at maximum broadcast power. This is Earth. The beacon you buried is intact. We discovered it 6 days ago beneath our foundations. You are acknowledged. 6 minutes of silence. Then, we did not anticipate this development. Our doctrine holds that consecrated worlds remain dormant between cycles. We do not understand what we are seeing. The structures, the vessels, the orbital installations. These are not consistent with our records of the indigenous population. The response from Earth, 50,000 years have passed. We are no longer the population you remember. Marin heard the exchange through the secure channel, sitting in the chamber, and she felt something shift inside her that she could not name. Not anger, not satisfaction, not triumph, something quieter, something that had the weight of deep time and the temperature of stone that has been warmed by a purpose held for 50 millennia. The Selevari had planted a seed and expected to find a garden. Instead, they had found a continent. The third Selevari transmission was the one that mattered. We are reviewing our doctrine. Our records indicate that this world was classified as spiritually dormant. The beacon was placed to ensure the doctrinal cycle could resume without disruption upon our return. We are prepared to begin reconsecration procedures as scheduled. Marin heard Commander Voss's voice over the channel, low and precise. They're trying to assert the old claim, doctrinal authority over the planet. The Continental Council's response took 9 minutes to compose. When it was transmitted, it was not in Old Selevari. It was in Standard Terran with a Selevari translation appended. We acknowledge your historical presence on this world and the beacon you placed beneath the Alcazar Basin. Both are artifacts of a relationship that ended 50,000 years ago. Earth is not dormant. Earth is not fallow. Earth is not awaiting consecration by any external authority. You are welcome to approach under escort to observe the beacon site. You are not welcome to land military or liturgical forces on the planet's surface. If you require resupply or navigational assistance before departing, it will be provided. The fleet did not move for 2 hours. During those 2 hours, Marin descended to the deepest chamber, the small, dark room at 208 meters, with the black crystal disc in its floor, and she sat with her hand on the disc and listened. The sustained note filled the room. Above her, through 200 meters of alien crystal and original crust, and engineered basalt and desert floor, a fleet of 47 vessels was deciding whether to accept that the world they had left fallow had grown beyond their authority. And beneath her palm, the power source that had driven the beacon for 50,000 years hummed with a constancy that made the fleet's decision feel small. She thought about the disk. Whatever technology powered it was so far beyond anything in Earth's engineering archive that it might as well have been magic. 50,000 years of continuous operation without degradation. No fuel cell, no reactor, no energy source in human science could do that. The Selevari, for all their doctrinal arrogance, for all their dismissal of humanity as local fauna, had built something genuinely extraordinary. They had put a piece of forever into the ground. And humanity had built over it, not because they knew, not because they planned to contain or surpass it, simply because humanity builds. The consolidation engineers had laid their foundations, and the beacon had been enclosed within them, protected, insulated, preserved by accident, by the sheer compulsive momentum of a species that responds to being abandoned by constructing something permanent. Two kinds of patience, Marin thought. The selevari had built a patient machine. Humanity had been patient. The machine was still perfect after 50,000 years. The civilization that had grown above it was still growing. She climbed back to the surface as the first light of dawn reached the basin. The sky was extraordinary. The orbital platforms glittered in the early light, their defense arrays catching the sun before it reached the ground. Above them, the human warships were visible now, not as points of light but as shapes, vast and deliberate, their hulls reflecting dawn in bands of silver and shadow. She counted 9 of them, arranged in a loose hemisphere above the basin. Each one was larger than the entire selevari fleet combined. And beyond the warships, at the edge of visibility, the selevari fleet. 47 vessels, their formation no longer ceremonial. The wedge had collapsed into a defensive cluster, the temple ships pulling inward, the escort cruisers forming a screen. They looked small. They looked like what they were, a procession that had arrived at a world they expected to own and found that the world had outgrown them by a margin that made ownership meaningless. The final selevari transmission came as the sun cleared the eastern horizon. We understand. Our doctrine will be revised. We request permission to send a small delegation to view the beacon before we depart. The Continental Council granted the request. The hours between the Council's grant and the shuttle's arrival were the strangest of Marin's life. She stayed at the site, unable to leave, unable to justify staying, but held by a compulsion that she recognized as professional and knew was something more. She checked her instruments. She reviewed her field notes. She ate a ration bar that tasted like nothing and drank water from a canteen that she set down on the basin floor and watched vibrate with the 61-second pulse. Rowe found her sitting on the equipment crate where they had talked the first night. "You don't have to be here for this," he said. "Voss has a diplomatic team." "I'm the one who found it," Marin said. "I drilled into their cathedral. I should be the one standing here when they come to see it." "That's not in your job description." Neither was discovering a 50,000-year-old alien beacon, but here we are. 7 hours after the Council's grant, Marin stood at the edge of the excavation site and watched a selevari shuttle descend through the atmosphere. It was a ceremonial craft, pale gray, ornate, its hull inscribed with liturgical text that caught the afternoon light. It settled on the basin floor 200 meters from the drill site, and a delegation of 6 emerged. Selevari. Marin had seen archival images, but images did not prepare for the reality. They were tall, taller than human, narrow-framed, their skin a matte silver gray that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. They wore robes of deep indigo over articulated armor, ceremonial, not combat, but the armor was there, a memory of the military crusade that had first brought them to Earth. Their faces were angular, sharp-featured, with wide-set eyes that moved constantly, taking in the floodlights, the drill rigs, the defense emplacements, the sky full of ships that were not theirs. The delegation's leader was an elder. Marin could tell by the pattern of darker pigmentation around her eyes and the heavier ceremonial symbols on her robes. She walked with the careful deliberation of someone processing information faster than she could show it. Her eyes moved from the excavation site to the horizon, where the upper tiers of meridian were visible as a faint geometric smudge against the sky, and then to the orbital platforms directly above, and then to the warships beyond them. The expression on her face was not anger, not fear, something more private, more devastating, the realization of irrelevance. Voss met the delegation at the perimeter. Marin stood 3 paces behind her, holding a case of core samples that no one had asked for but that she felt obscurely compelled to bring. The elder spoke in accented standard Terran. Her voice was deep, resonant, shaped by a vocal apparatus that was not human. "You found our beacon." 6 days ago, Voss said. "Dr. Calloway here pulled the first core sample. The elder's eyes moved to Marin. They were dark, almost without iris, and they held a depth that Marin associated with old stone, layers of time compressed into a surface that looked simple but contained multitudes. "You are a geologist." "Yes." "You study the bones of the world." "I study its structure, its history, what it was and what it became." The elder was quiet for a moment. Behind her, one of her attendants was looking at the defense emplacements, the automated batteries with their barrels angled skyward, and Marin saw the attendant's hand move involuntarily to his side, where a weapon would have hung on a military officer's belt. There was no weapon. The gesture was instinct, the reflex of a species that recognized threat architecture when it saw it. The elder noticed the gesture and said something in old selevari, a single word, quiet, and the attendant's hand dropped. "These installations," the elder said, turning back to Voss, "they are defensive." "Perimeter security for the excavation site," Voss said. "Standard deployment." "Standard." The elder's gaze moved to the sky, to the orbital platforms, to the warships. "Your standard is considerable." Voss said nothing. She did not need to. "May I see the beacon?" the elder asked. Marin looked at Voss. Voss nodded. The descent was slow. The personnel cage was not built for selevari proportions. The elder had to stoop, and her two attendants pressed against the walls, their ceremonial robes catching on the steel frame. Marin stood in the corner, watching the elder's face as the shaft walls changed from engineered basalt to original rock to the first crystalline seams of the structure. The elder's expression did not change, but her hands, long-fingered and gray, tightened on the cage railing. They reached the chamber. The elder stepped out and stood still. The amber and blue light washed over her, and for a moment Marin saw something she had not expected. Recognition. Not the recognition of a schematic or a report, the recognition of home. The crystalline walls pulsing in the 61-second rhythm, the column of indigo light spiraling upward, the inscriptions on the subsidiary chamber walls, the elder knew these things. They were hers, or they had been, 50,000 years ago. The elder walked to the base of the column. She moved slowly, her long-fingered hands held slightly away from her body, palms open, a posture that Marin read as ritual, though she could not have said why. The elder circled the column once, her eyes tracing the spiraling currents of light within the crystal, and then she stopped and placed one hand on its surface. The light beneath her fingers brightened, responding to a touch the structure had been designed to recognize. The harmonic shifted, not a new note but a completion, a chord resolved. The beacon knew its maker. The sustained note that had been running for 50,000 years altered its timbre, gaining a warmth that Marin felt in her chest. The column was greeting its builder. After 50 millennia of patience, of singing into the dark and receiving answers from across the stars, the beacon had been touched by the hands it was made for. One of the attendants made a sound, a low exhalation that Marin recognized across the species boundary as grief. The second attendant placed a hand on the wall and closed his eyes. The elder did not move. She stood with her palm against the column, her face turned upward, and the light played across her silver-gray features in patterns that might have been communication, or memory, or prayer. "We planted 37 of these," the elder said. Her voice was barely audible over the harmonic. "Across 37 worlds we consecrated. This is the only one still singing." Marin felt the weight of that statement settle into the chamber like a physical thing. 37 beacons, 36 silent. Only this one, buried beneath a world that should have remained dormant, protected by a civilization that did not know it was there, had survived the 50,000-year interval. "The others?" Marin asked. "The world's changed. Geological events, tectonic shifts, erosion, impacts. The beacons were designed to outlast surface disturbance, but they were not designed to outlast planetary evolution. The worlds moved on. The beacons were crushed, subducted, dissolved. But not this one. Not this one. The elder looked up at the column, and the expression on her face was no longer the devastating realization of irrelevance. It was something older, something Marin recognized because she saw it in her own mirror every time she held a core sample that told a story no one else could read. It was reverence. The reverence of a builder standing before a structure that has outlived the builder's civilization, maintained not by the builder's descendants but by strangers who did not know what they were maintaining, who simply built on top of it, around it, over it, and in doing so preserved the only surviving fragment of a 50,000-year-old promise. "You built this world," the elder said. She was not looking at the beacon anymore. She was looking at Marin. "You built a world that preserved a piece of ours." Marin thought about the consolidation engineers, who had laid 70 meters of reinforced basalt over the Alcazar Basin, sealing the beacon beneath an additional layer of protection they could not have intended because they did not know the beacon existed. She thought about the human cities that had risen above the engineered foundations, the defense grids that had been constructed in concentric layers around the population centers, the orbital platforms and atmospheric batteries and warships, all of it built as an answer to a question that had not yet been asked. And beneath all of it, the beacon, singing. "We didn't know it was here," Marin said. "I know. That is what makes it extraordinary." The elder removed her hand from the column. The light dimmed, returning to its steady pulse. "We came to reconsecrate a dormant world. What we found instead is a civilization that has consecrated itself." The delegation stayed for 3 hours. The elder examined the subsidiary chambers, traced the inscriptions with her fingers, listened to the harmonic with her eyes closed. Her attendants took no samples, made no recordings. They observed with the focused attention of pilgrims at a site that has exceeded the mythology that brought them there. Before they returned to the surface, the elder stopped at the edge of the main chamber and turned back. "The beacon will continue," she said, "if you permit it." "It's been singing for 50,000 years, Marin said. "I don't think it needs our permission." "It needs your protection. It has always needed your protection. You simply did not know you were providing it." Marin looked at the column. The indigo light spiraled upward, patient, eternal, indifferent to the question of who owned it. A piece of alien engineering buried on a world that had been abandoned, preserved by a civilization that had grown over it like a forest growing over the foundations of a forgotten house, finding the foundations not a hindrance but a root. "It'll keep singing," Marin said. The elder inclined her head. A gesture that Marin recognized across the species boundary, across 50,000 years of separation, across the vast gulf between a crusade that had treated Earth as a fallow field and a civilization that had turned the field into a fortress. Gratitude, unspoken, undeclared, but present in the angle of the head and the stillness of the hands and the depth of the dark eyes. The delegation climbed to the surface in silence. The elder did not speak again until she stood on the basin floor, under the open sky, with the orbital platforms directly above and the warships arrayed beyond them like a ceiling of quiet authority. She turned to Voss. "We will depart." "You are welcome to resupply before you leave," Voss said. "The offer stands." "No. We carry enough for the return journey." The elder paused. "Your offer is noted. Your restraint is noted." She looked at Marin. "And the care of your geologist is noted. The beacon is in good hands." Marin found that she had no words. She nodded instead. The delegation returned to their shuttle. The pale gray craft lifted from the basin floor, caught the late afternoon sun on its inscribed hull, and climbed through the atmosphere toward the fleet waiting above. Marin watched it go, tracking its diminishing shape against the bright sky until it was lost among the points of light that were orbital platforms and warships, and beyond them, the clustered shapes of 47 selevari vessels. The selevari departed that evening. 47 vessels, reorienting from their defensive cluster into a departure formation that was neither ceremonial nor military but something in between. An acknowledgement, perhaps, that the purpose of their journey had changed somewhere between arrival and departure, and the formation needed to change with it. They were escorted to the edge of the solar system by a flight of human interceptors that maintained a respectful distance and did not activate weapons. Dahl, monitoring the beacon from the main chamber, reported that the return signal, the 50,000-year conversation between beacon and fleet, faded as the selevari moved beyond the system's edge. For the first time since it was buried, the beacon was singing without an answer. Marin watched from the surface of the Alcazar Basin, standing on 50,000 years of accumulated answer, as the last selevari engine signature faded from the detection grid. The beacon beneath her feet pulsed once. 61 seconds later, it pulsed again. She went back underground. The chamber was empty now. No delegation, no engineers, no instruments. Just the column and the light and the harmonic, the same as it had been for 50 millennia, the same as it would be for 50 more. Marin sat on the floor, her back against the warm crystal, and listened to the song that no human voice had been meant to hear. A piece of patience made solid. A seed that had been planted by gardeners who expected the garden to be empty when they returned. And the garden had not been empty. The garden had grown a civilization around it, over it, through it. And the seed had survived because the civilization, without knowing, without intending, had built foundations deep enough to shelter it from the weight of geological time. Marin pressed her palm to the floor. The crystal was warm. The harmonic pulsed through her hand, through her wrist, through the quiet center of her chest. She was a geologist. She studied the bones of the world, and the bones of this world told a story that no single discipline could contain, a story of abandonment and endurance, of a planet treated as a footnote and a species that had turned the footnote into a monument. The selevari had come looking for a dead world. What they had found was something they had no doctrine for, a world that had taken what was left behind and made it part of the foundation. Above her, the city of Meridian hummed in its foundations. The orbital platforms tracked their slow arcs. The warships held their positions in the high dark, and beneath all of it the beacon sang. 61 seconds, and again, and again. The bones of the world keeping time.